What's going on, guys? Going to be a quick recap of the last couple of days, probably going back to like Friday, because I want to talk about the P-shaped volume profile and the micro pullbacks, which are typically D-shaped volume profiles. Okay, so what we see quite often when we are coming off of a sell pressure like this, a downward sell-off, is you see a lot of these P-shaped profiles where they have a long lower tail and they also have a very top heavy volume, right? So the POC is towards the top, most of the volume is towards the top, and they have basically no upper tail or a very weak upper tail. And what you'll see sometimes when this happens, you'll see multiple P-shaped profiles kind of back to back to back. And when this does happen, when you have like 2, 3, 4 P-shaped profiles back to back, what it does is it leaves open a lot of untested value with those lower tails. Basically, take Friday, for example, here, and then you have Monday, for another example. When you have these tails that are just left untested and you start to stall gaining value, where it's been gaining value over and over, but now we're stalling out. You're putting in those highs repeatedly, kind of like a rollover top. You can then look for those lower tails to be retested, possibly be taken out completely. We saw this happen quite often last year. I believe it was September of not last year, but the year before, where we had that really big one where we had like 4 or 5 P shapes back to back to back. And then we had that one day that just wiped out all of those tails with one massive sell off. That is pretty common because, like I said, you typically want to come down and test those lower tails. So, whenever you see these P shapes back to back, you really need to monitor that buy pressure and make sure they are protecting those value lows of those P-shaped profiles or of the D-shaped micro pullbacks. We'll get into that here in a second. If they do not protect those value lows, then you can target a squeeze downward back into those lower tails. Okay, so we're not seeing that just yet. We had a little bit of that today where we had that sell off on the high and we retested that lower tail of Monday, but we're not pushing down into Friday's tail just yet. But one thing you want to look for is when we have these P-shaped profiles like we have right here, if it is stalling out and you are failing to find higher value, what you'll typically do is you'll start putting in what I call a micro pullback, where you'll put in a D-shaped profile pretty much inside of that P-shaped profile, basically overlapping the POCs. Pretty much just telling you that it likes that value and it wants to continue building up inside that same value. Now, that's not overly bearish by itself, but what happens is if you see those micro pullbacks like we do yesterday and kind of today, if you see that start to pressure those value lows by building up a very bottom heavy profile, kind of like what we see today, that becomes a problem because once again, they leave open these very obvious targets with these lower tails, very weak value. So if we continue to build up that bottom heavy value here, pressuring that value low of the micro pullback or of the P-shaped day, that's when you want to start looking for those lower tails. Very good targets, possibly for a squeeze. Now, if you are protecting those value lows, if those buyers continue to protect the value lows, then obviously you treat it like a D-shaped volume profile. You want to be a buyer around the value low and a seller around the value high, and then you just rotate over and over and over. And then on the buy side, same thing. If you begin to hold value above those value highs, then you go back to the P-shaped profile and you say, okay, we don't have an upper tail. So if I take the lower tail and I say, let's find an upper tail that will be about the same size. Let's extend that upper tail. That will give you a relatively good target. So if we continue to push up here, we break above that value high, we look for that target above that value high where that upper tail would be. So it'd be about 35 right now. Okay. So hold above the value high, you look for the tail extension. You hold below the value low, you look to break into the lower tails. You hold inside a value, you just rotate over and over and over. Okay. So right now we're kind of in the stage that it's still rotating, but I would say you want to be a little bit careful because this could be considered like a look above and fail where we tried to test higher value. We tried to extend that upper tail right out of the gate today, but then it shot down very quickly. So they are protecting the value high with a very strong sell pressure, and then they pushed into the lower tail of Monday. So they've already showed that they do like that lower value. They want to push down into that lower value. So if we can't stay above this 55, those value lows from Monday and also the lower day of Tuesday, then we're obviously going to continue lower. If we stay above it, then you look for those rotations. So this bottom heavy value, not looking too good going into tomorrow and possibly the end of the week. Okay, so let me just go to a clean chart here. Let me find one of my charts that's fairly clean. We'll use one of these here. And I'll just rehash kind of what we already said. So when you see the P-shaped profile, obviously when price is going up, you look for either a D-shaped profile, a bell curve profile, inside of that same value, or if you have a kind of bullish D-shaped profile holding above that prior value, then you look for the tail extension. If you're very bottom heavy and you're building value towards that value low, then you look for that retrace of that lower tail. The more P shapes you have back to back, the more dangerous it is because it leaves open a lot of untested value on those lower tails. Okay, so if you see multiple back to back to back P-shaped profiles and you have one of those, let's say D-shaped profile here, and we try to push up, but then it fails and it comes back down, then you can see that squeeze into those lower tails. And this is very similar to what we are seeing at this moment, where we had that P-shaped profile, we tried to break, it didn't like it. We are right here right now on ES and NASDAQ. We're seeing if we can hold on to that value low. If it does not hold on to that value low, then like I said, watch those lower tails. Okay. So today's recap, I wasn't recapping like exact trades, but because this pattern is constantly showing itself, I wanted to make sure you guys understand how to read what is going on when you have these profiles back to back to back. Okay. So when you have a micro pullback profile like we had yesterday, you want to try to focus on rotations. Don't be overly biased on one side. Sell the value high area, buy the value low, and just kind of look for those rotations. When you start to build aggressive value, a really strong node outside of it, either above the value high or below the value low, then you can start being more one directional. Okay. And always be careful trading around the POC, especially if it's an overlapping POC. Okay. So these 2 days here, if you trade around the POC, there's a lot of chop that goes on around that level. So you might get chopped out. Okay. So be very careful doing that. But all right, guys, keep an eye on that moving forward. That's a very common pattern you see very often on ES and NQ. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit that like button. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace, everybody.